couldn't be happy that their mother was able to find happiness in love after many years of life. But the heroine wasn't sure that Helena Wedgwood's feelings were truly sincere. Only she saw terrible pictures of the future, in which her entire family perishes at the hands of a terrible stepfather. And Duke Waldeck of Orleans does not even receive any punishment for the brutal murders. No matter how much young Imerlin tried to convince her mother, she didn't even want to listen to her beloved daughter. The woman successfully pretended to love the Duke, since she was very pleased with his financial achievements. The heroine could never have imagined that Helena would be so greedy for other people's money, but the desire to save her family from the hands of a psychopath was so strong inside the girl that she still found a way out. The lady herself did not expect that salvation would come from such an unexpected direction, but she accepted it. The whole thing was that the son of the Duke of Orleans proposed marriage to the young Imerlin. But how their fictitious marriage will turn out, and how these guys came to it, we will find out in order. In fact, this whole story began with a banquet in honor of the birthday of Margaret Beaufort, who was a famous aristocrat. Many noble people immediately noticed the guests, who stood out from the crowd. The conversation was about the Wedgwood family, of which our heroine was a part, not yet suspecting her future. Her mother was often discussed in high circles as a woman who changed men like gloves. This is why the aristocrats paid so much attention to Helena, whose behavior they considered unworthy. And part of this barrage of negative thoughts also fell on Imerlin, as Helena's daughter. The girl would have preferred to avoid participating in this banquet if it were not for her mother's desire to get married. This woman was known as a lady who had several husbands in a short period of time. That is why so many rumors were constantly discussed about the Wedgwood family, and all their relatives were despised. But for Helena, all this was a trifle, because she loved her children and worked for their future. But the choice of the former commoner was not always correct, since the man had vices. They died one after another, and Helena had to find a new purpose for living without poverty. In the end, all that was left for the Wedgwood family was a small house and a pile of debts from Helena's spouses. In desperation, the woman turned to the famous Duke Waldeck of Orleans, whose status was known to everyone. In a short time, she got him to propose to her, intending to get rich again. But the aristocrats did not remain silent at the sight of this, and discontent also fell upon Imerlin. Once again, the girl could not live a day without adventure, as she ran into an old acquaintance. She was the daughter of a famous aristocrat, Cavendish, named Vivian, and she had a difficult character. In the past, the heroine often encountered this cruel girl, so she remembered her well. It was Vivian who organized numerous bullying incidents against the girl from a commoner family. Imerlin could put up with a lot, but she always became furious when it came to her family. This time was no exception, so red wine was poured on Vivian's beautiful dress. At the same time, the heroine herself did not feel a drop of pity for the girl who had offended her many times. The lady was so tired of enduring everyone's bullying that she was ready to give up her status. But the mother's pleading face still stood before Imerlin's eyes, and only that stopped her. More than anything in the world now, the girl wanted only peace and quiet alone. But at this banquet, there was only one corner that the aristocrats were unlikely to look into. And it just so happened that at exactly that moment, this place was occupied by another person. The most terrible thing for the heroine was that she met Waldeck's son, named Eric. Imerlin had heard a lot about the cold-blooded but rich Duke of Orleans, so the lady did not know what she should expect from his son, who could be like his father. The guy looked extremely unhappy that the lady had accidentally invaded his personal space. But the heroine just wanted to be alone, but ended up getting into more trouble. Eric's face did not bode well, as he knew how to make a scary expression. At the sight of him, fear pierced the entire body of the girl, who was often beaten by her fathers in her distant childhood. But it turned out that the guy had no intention of causing any harm to the young and inexperienced woman. He was angered by the fact that Imerlin had such an opinion of him, and yet he belonged to high society. Eric never allowed himself to offend women, so he was deeply offended by the heroine's thoughts. He had no intention of hurting her, even though he was not happy with the future relationship. But the boy never questioned his father's decisions, so he silently resigned himself to his marriage. Before leaving, he advised Imerlin to either run or defend herself from a threat next time. The heroine did not expect that this gloomy aristocrat would suddenly show care and understanding towards her. Her body always reacted instantly when her brain was visited by terrible memories of the past. She had suffered so many beatings and abuses from her father that she could not stop being afraid of men. The girl cried many nights in her childhood from resentment and humiliation, but nothing could be changed. So even now, the heroine was not sure that her family could ever be happy. Her solitude was suddenly broken by an unknown figure, whose presence the girl did not notice. It turned out to be an old woman in a cloak that tightly hid her face, but focused attention on the drinks. The woman persistently offered the lady a drink, and Imerlin was not ready to refuse it. After everything that had happened to her that evening, the heroine wanted to relax at least a little mentally. So, despite all her mother's requests, the girl boldly drank the unknown drink from the old woman. The woman smiled slyly and whispered that this remedy would show Emerlin her future. The rest of the evening passed in a fog for the heroine, and all night she saw a long dream. It described the events that gradually led to the marriage between Helena and Waldeck. But at the very end of this dream, the entire Emerlin family died, and Orleans was the reason for this. The heroine forever remembered how coldly he wiped the blood of her loved ones from the sharp blade. This nightmare made the girl jump up in bed, although it was still too early to wake up. But it turned out that the ever-active Helena hadn't slept either and had come to her daughter to chat. Wedgwood regularly overindulged in alcohol at banquets, so she remembered nothing the next morning. After seeing this, Emerlin wondered if her mother really loved the Duke of Orleans. As she expected, the woman liked the fact that he had a lot of money much more. This fact greatly saddened the heroine, who was still under the influence of a terrible nightmare. But she couldn't tell her mother about her delusional dreams, no matter how close they were to each other. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by a maid, as she had an important message for Wedgwood. It turned out that Eric had come to see them early in the morning because he had questions about the wedding. The heroine did not expect that her mother would suddenly shift the responsibility for talking to her future relative onto her. Helena was in no mood for socializing at that moment, as her head was splitting from the alcohol. Meanwhile, the Duke's son was patiently waiting for at least some person to meet. Eric was unhappy that he was not met immediately upon arrival, even though he had specifically set aside time. Emerlin had become accustomed to discontent throughout her life, so she didn't take it to heart. Surprisingly, the guy quickly changed his anger to mercy, although only recently he seemed irritated. At the sight of the maid, the lady was overcome by a strange feeling of déjà vu, as if she had already seen such a scene somewhere. And the tea on the tray looked very much like the one that had accidentally spilled on her in her nightmare. So the girl was prepared for the fact that she would now get injured, but she did not have time to avoid it. Mistrust mixed with pain inside the heroine, who desperately tried to understand what was happening. She clearly saw this entire plot in her dream, and everything was repeated down to the details. This meant that the words of that strange old woman were true, and the lady saw her future. At that moment, Eric could not get through to the girl, who was deep in thought. She was afraid that everything in the dream would turn out to be true, and her family would really die at the hands of the Duke. And then Emerlin will be left completely alone. And it is not a fact that her death will not be the next one in this plot. In fact, since childhood, the heroine had a dream of opening her own restaurant. She thought a lot about how her family would have fun running this exciting business. But now the disturbing images from the dream made it clear to the girl that this dream was not destined to come true. In the nightmare, Helena behaved so anxiously that the lady had no chance to remain calm. The mother constantly warned her daughter that Waldeck should not have been given their inheritance from their previous father. In her dream, the heroine begged her mother to escape from the Duke before it was too late for them. But no matter how afraid Helena was, she understood that they would not be able to hide from such a person anywhere. The end of the dream was as disturbing as all the events that had happened in it before. In the middle of the night, Helena suddenly woke her daughter up and asked her to take the letter to Inspector Patrick. At the time, the girl did not understand the urgency of the situation, and her mother did not have time to explain. If the lady had known that that smile from her mother would be the last in her life, she would not have let her go. For some reason, Emerlin felt like the whole family would have to leave the Orleans estate at any moment. But no matter how long Miss waited, neither Feely nor Helene appeared, and shots rang out in the estate. Then the heroine had to gather all her courage into a fist to go to the place where the sound was. It was at that moment that she saw the lifeless bodies of her family, whose blood was spilling across the floor. Duke Waldeck stood over the corpses of Helena and Feely, and not a drop of pity was reflected on his face. All the man needed was the land title, and he was willing to kill for it. Only now did it dawn on the heroine that her dream could indeed have predicted such a terrible future. Only the ice that Eric pressed against her hand pulled the girl out of the captivity of difficult memories. Taken by surprise, the lady let out such a thin cry that any singer would have envied her. She forgot that the Duke's son had remained by her side all this time out of concern. Now the lady suspected this handsome man of being in cahoots with his father. But Eric's kindness and attentiveness confused the girl, leading her to think that he might be different. Emerlin needed proof that this guy would side with her in the future. Eric's face showed surprise when the lady demanded financial compensation from him. It was the heroine's turn to be surprised when the Duke's son calmly agreed to her terms. Although the girl had specifically named a large sum, the guy didn't even blink an eye and simply presented the receipt. The money that the heroine asked for could only be earned by noble aristocrats. Just yesterday, the lady saw rage on Eric's face, and now he was kind to her, which confused the girl. But this gave Emerlin hope that the younger Orleans really did not support the elder. She had already heard rumors that the Duke's son was personally conducting some business behind his back. But the heroine was not ready to tell the whole truth to a stranger right now. She was saved only by the appearance of her mother, who managed to tidy herself up in order to go out to her relative. But for some reason, Eric was not at all happy to see Helena, who was beaming with joy for him. The guy behaved extremely strict with the woman who was soon to become his mother. Wedgwood usually had an easy time charming men, but this time something went wrong. Her pride was deeply hurt by the fact that the aristocrat did not pay attention to her efforts and care. Helena would have liked to replace Eric's long-dead mother, but it seemed that was completely impossible. Memories flooded Immerlin's mind again, and this time they concerned Emily Orleans. There were rumors that she committed suicide, but in a dream, the lady found information about her murder. After everything she saw, the heroine had no doubt that Waldeck had killed his wife. So more than anything in the world, she would like her mother to break off her engagement with that terrible man. But Helena loved money so much that she would never have given up rich Orleans. The woman was confident that she would emerge from the marriage alive again, as had happened the previous times. Before, Emerlin would have believed her mother, but now she had doubts about their future. But Helena was ready to sacrifice her own happiness so that everything would be okay with her children. So the heroine had no chance to dissuade her beloved mother from marriage, unless the lady can find documents that will prove Waldeck's involvement in the murder. In the meantime, Miss had to silently prepare for her mother's wedding, which she feared. The girl hadn't lived in such luxury for a long time, so everything around her seemed too expensive. Immerlin wasn't used to the fact that her outfits cost almost as much as several good estates. In fact, the heroine would prefer to be given money instead of being dressed up like that. But the lady did not take into account that there might be ears near her that would be better off not hearing this phrase. It turned out that the maid Lily, who was assigned to the girl from the Orleans estate, heard everything perfectly well. This was very inopportune, since the heroine would not want Duke Waldeck to know about her feelings, so she had to quickly explain to the maid what exactly she meant when she talked about money. But instead, Imerlin would have preferred to think of a plan to save her family from a terrible future. But fate did not give the lady a chance to think, as she suddenly met an old acquaintance. This time, Vivian was mentally prepared for any antics from her longtime rival, so Cavendish was going to get even for all the humiliation she had recently experienced at the ball. The heroine first met this girl several years ago, when she was studying at the academy. Then, Vivian was unhappy, because a commoner was studying next to her. For some time, Emerlin had to silently endure all the bullying from the rich lady. But Wedgwood's fiery nature meant she did not remain calm and patient for long. So the last thing she wanted was to communicate with such an unpleasant daughter of an aristocrat. The heroine didn't see any reason to ask Vivian for forgiveness. This only made Cavendish more angry, as she demanded due respect. The most logical option was to give in and compensate for the recently ruined dress. But even this was not enough for Vivian. Although Emerlin no longer listened to her, Cavendish was unable to contain her anger after what Wedgwood had done to her. However, she had no intention of running after the girl to beg her to apologize for everything. Instead, the lady insulted Emerlin from afar, and she could not ignore this fact. Suddenly, it dawned on the heroine that she could try to break off her mother's engagement to the Duke, and the lady chose the annoying Vivian as her first victim to carry out this plan. The girl was only glad that she would finally deal with her longtime adversary personally. As a result, the next day, the heroine's older brother was horrified by what she had managed to do. The one who took the damage to their family's reputation the worst was Helena, who was not prepared for it. But the heroine was only glad that now all the people around were whispering about their family. The more people pointed fingers at her, the higher the likelihood that the engagement would be called off. For the first time in her life, Emerlin was grateful to fate for introducing her to Vivian, while Philly had no idea what had gotten into his usually calm sister. The guy only hoped that Emerlin would accuse Vivian of provocation and attack. But the girl wasn't going to lie, because she really did attack her rival. This is exactly what she planned to tell Waldeck, so that he would renounce their family. They were just on their way to meet the Duke of Orleans, as he had some questions. But the man didn't show a drop of anger on his face, even though Emerlin tried so hard to ruin everything. This fact surprised the girl, who was preparing for cruel abuse from the Duke. But in the end, Waldeck beamed so sweetly and calmly, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. Only now did Emerlin realize how difficult it would be for her to break off this engagement. Feely constantly asked the Duke for forgiveness, as if he had no self-respect. The lady's difficulty was further compounded by the fact that Eric was constantly looking only at her. Because of this pressure, the girl still hasn't figured out how to ruin everything further. At one point, the older brother finally crossed the line with his apologies for Emerlin. And finally, Waldeck showed his true face as his rage showed in his eyes. Only the heroine was ready for such things, since she learned a lot about the Duke in her dream. Only she was not afraid of the menacing gaze of the man who could destroy her in an instant. In contrast, Eric seemed surprisingly calm and kind, as if he really was on Mrs. side. But Emerlin did not console herself with false hopes, and did not support her brother's apologies. She specifically stated loudly that she attacked Vivian only because she wanted to. In doing so, the heroine caused so much hostility in Waldeck that she could not have imagined. Even Eric noticed that at that moment, the Duke of Orleans was not himself after what he had heard. But Feely, as usual, interrupted all conversations, drawing attention to his actions. The guy always had a lie prepared for any occasion in life, and he took advantage of it. Wedgwood showed real acting skills when he recounted all of Vivian's abuse. What surprised Imerlin most was that her brother had with him a forged letter in the lady's handwriting. Now, in Waldeck's eyes, it looked as if Imerlin had simply hit back at her offender. But the heroine tried so hard to be blamed for that unpleasant attack. The girl was deathly afraid that the terrible future from the nightmare would nevertheless come true. That's why her brother's actions only ruined all the plans she had been working on. So, at the first opportunity, the heroine did everything to remain alone in the estate. Eric also did not get closer to Feely, who confidently went hunting with the Duke. As soon as everyone left, the lady had to listen to the butler's words about the architecture inside the estate, while the heroine was burning with the desire to explore everything alone as quickly as possible. She was afraid that she might not have time to find the documents before the Duke and her older brother returned. Although the lady recently caused a real scandal, it turned out that even that did not help. That's why the girl was so desperate for any information that would compromise Waldeck. And this data could only be in the Duke's office, where Imerlin was forbidden to enter. That's why Miss first needed to get rid of the butler's close supervision. Imerlin easily managed to send the old man for tea, which she used for reconnaissance. The heroine had no intention of behaving well, because life and death were at stake. That's why the lady was so serious, even though she broke all the rules of conduct. Thanks to her dream, Imerlin remembered well which direction the Duke's office was, so it wasn't difficult for her to find him, and all that was left was to find out where all the documents were. However, the lady's long search did not lead to any results, no matter how hard she tried. The heroine managed to check every crack in the office, but there were no documents anywhere. The only option left was a book wall, which looked strange from the outside. It didn't take the girl long to open it, but then problems arose, all because the voices of the maids were heard in the corridor, looking for Imerlin everywhere. This meant that the heroine could very well be caught in the Duke's office, which was unacceptable. But at the most terrible moment, the door of the secret room suddenly swung open behind the lady. Before the lady could even blink, men's hands reached out to save her. It turned out that Eric also looked into his father's office, taking advantage of his temporary absence. This is how the assistants were unable to find anyone in the Duke's office, since they did not know about this move. Waldeck's son barely had time to close the doors and hold his breath so as not to give himself away due to anxiety. It was only when the servants had gone to other rooms that he finally turned his attention to Imerlin. All this time, the girl could not move, as she was under the power of her memories. It was immediately clear to Eric that something was wrong with Helena's daughter, since she was not responding. But at that moment, the guy had no idea how to help the girl cope with the overwhelming emotions. The whole thing was that as a child, the heroine's father often locked her in the dark as a punishment. The man didn't care what deep trauma he was inflicting on his daughter with his actions. That's why Imerlin was so afraid of the dark and enclosed spaces, even after so many years. Each time she was visited by horrors from the past, from which she could not escape on her own. These nightmares ended only when Helena learned about her husband's abuse. But the mother did not have time to save her daughter from the memories that were firmly lodged in her head. The lady was most ashamed of having appeared in such a state before the Duke's son. The girl was not ready to tell anyone about her past, in which she suffered a lot because of men. Imerlin involuntarily feared any action from Eric, although he did nothing bad to her. The guy was genuinely offended by the fact that Wedgwood, for some reason, twitched at the sight of his help. While the heroine could not find an answer to the question of why this man sympathized with her at all, stubbornness and pride surged within the lady, so she jumped to her feet. Due to her emotions, Imerlin completely forgot that she wanted to find the documents in the Duke's office. But she found herself under fair interrogation from Eric, who caught her in such an inappropriate place. But the lady quickly came up with a saving thought, because the guy shouldn't have been here either. Since he hid from the servants with her, he did not tell anyone about his plans in his father's office. This circumstance put Imerlin on equal terms with Eric, who also broke the rules. The Duke's son clearly didn't expect to ever encounter such a smart and cunning girl, but he really had nothing to say to the heroine, who quickly thought of a way to salvation. So Eric had to resign himself to the fact that this time they would silently hide each other's presence in the office. In fact, if it weren't for this guy, the lady would have had no idea how to escape from the servants. But this did not mean that she would forgive him for his morning silence, because Eric knew about the fake letter. It turned out that the Duke's son did not interfere because he did not want to hurt other people. Everything inside the girl shrank from such stupid thoughts that were impossible in reality. She always lived by different laws, as she knew about the cruelty of many people in the Empire. That's why the heroine honestly admitted to Eric that he was stupid and ignorant. The guy clearly didn't expect that his inaction could also be called a real sin. The Duke's son tried to help everyone around him and not interfere unless there was a reason to do so. Immerlin was only distracted from further conversation by hearing shots in the forest. The memory of Fili leaving with Waldeck immediately flashed through the girl's mind. The lady had no confidence in the Duke, so her heart sank with fear for her elder brother. In desperation, Miss was ready to go crazy, since she was not afraid to go down from the second floor. The heroine had already done something similar in the past when she was running away from her opponents. But what came as a surprise to Eric was that the young aristocrat possessed such physical abilities. It seemed to him that girls from high society should live in better conditions. However, Amerlin was fine after the jump, although another lady would have definitely been hurt. This whole situation did not escape the eyes of Lily, who always secretly watched Wedgwood. Only the maid knew that Eric had managed to get some documents from his father's office. Meanwhile, the heroine reached the forest, but inside it, everything was quiet and calm among people. The only thing that confused the girl was the types of animals caught during the hunt. But all the men were steadfast in their attitude towards such a spectacle. Otherwise, they would not have chosen such a hobby for themselves. Waldeck's face was expressionless, as if he hadn't just been hunting birds and animals. But the lady was never able to steal important documents to break off her mother's engagement. Even after several days, Immerlin had not succeeded in her endeavors, which only made her more anxious. She alone was worried about the upcoming wedding, which was getting closer every day. The girl never came up with a single saving idea that could help her on her way. While the relatives continued to rejoice over their closeness to the wealthy family, such luxury was the first time in the lives of Phil and Helena, so they could not take their eyes off it. That's why the mother didn't even want to think about the fact that her wedding with the Duke would not happen in the end. She saw their family's salvation from poverty in this marriage, so she didn't even think about its destruction. Helena was going to do everything to ensure that her children had a happy and good future. Despite all the rumors about her, this woman always tried for the sake of her beloved children. So she didn't forget to scold her eldest for always running around nightclubs with aristocrats. One of the most popular of these places was a club called the Night Rose. The guy tried not to miss a single meeting at that club, since the princess was present there. As soon as the heroine heard about this rumor, another plan was instantly born in her head. As a result, that night, it was she from the Wedgwood family who penetrated closer to the night streets and people. It turned out that many aristocrats did not miss the opportunity to show themselves at such a time. Couples often ran away from home for secret dates that constantly warmed their hearts. Thanks to her brother's descriptions, the lady easily found the right building because of the sign on it. As Immerlin expected, the guards greeted the girl, who had not come before, with extreme caution. Their goal was to stop anyone who had nothing to do with the secret Night Rose Club. But the heroine knew the password that Philly had given, so the girl easily got inside. She was looking forward to meeting Ella Dennick, who was the princess of the empire. Rumor had it that she was so jealous that she often got rid of women to take their boyfriends for herself. Many men tried to please this girl in order to gain wealth and status. And today, the heroine planned to impress Ella, since she could use the princess's help. She even specially purchased a new outfit that attracted attention with its luxury. But the very first waiter upset the lady by saying that Ella never went out to meet people. Immerlin couldn't even imagine that it would be so difficult for her to see someone with the last name Dennick. This meant that the girl's brilliant plan was in jeopardy because of such a trifle. But the heroine did not give up so easily, so she quickly noticed a strange room upstairs. Men would come out of it periodically, so it could have been the princess's own room. To get inside, the lady had to attract the attention of one of the aristocrats at the ball. But the heroine had no experience in love affairs, so she didn't know how to do it. Meanwhile, the figure of the handsome guy was getting closer and closer, and something urgently needed to be done. As a result, Miss was so lost in thought that she didn't even notice how she had encountered the unknown. All the saving words instantly flew out of Emerlin's head, who found herself in an embarrassed situation. But the lady got her way because the aristocrat turned his intense and tenacious gaze on her. Something unkind flashed in his eyes, because no one walked alone in this club. Immerlin remembered too late her brother's warnings that she might be misunderstood. And now she found herself in a situation that she would have preferred never to get into in her life. What angered the heroine most was that the guy pulled her so hard that she lost her shoe. The lady would never have thought that in just a moment, Eric Orleans himself would find this shoe. But Immerlin had already used all means of self-defense to ensure that the unknown person left her alone. The Duke's son clearly did not expect to meet the girl in such an inappropriate place for her. The heroine was no less surprised at the sight of Eric, to whom she would have preferred not to show herself. In fact, it was for the princess's sake that the Duke's son recently came to the secret nightclub. But there were constant arguments between them, as the boy and the girl had very different characters. Ella forgave Eric a lot because he was one of the most helpful people to her. In turn, the Duke's son did not plan to change, even if the princess asked him to. Even at a young age, he became a master swordsman, something no one expected from the influential Orleans family. But what surprised people even more was that Eric calmly accepted knighthood, Although he could have followed in his father's footsteps, from that very moment on, he was unquestioningly devoted to the princess who had noticed him. That's why Eric obediently took the secret documents from his father's office, even though he didn't allow it. Ella clearly didn't expect the Duke's son to betray his own father in order to help her. She had already heard more than once that the elder Orleans could be involved in matters that were unpleasant for her. Now her brother Robert was laying claim to the throne, and the girl did everything to get around him. That's why she needed Eric's help so much, and the guy didn't refuse the princess anything. He never checked the documents personally, so he didn't know whether his father was guilty of anything. Because of this guy, Imerlin's words about his ignorance being ignorance had been tormenting him lately. But the younger Orleans tried not to think about what did not fit into the world he was accustomed to. He sincerely supported the princess, and in the end, she found nothing suspicious in the documents. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from Eric's shoulders when he was convinced that his father had not lied to anyone. In fact, the boy was afraid that the Duke might still support the prince as his heir. And now, he was not ashamed to look into Ella's face, because his family was pure before her. The princess took this fact with sadness, because she could not get her hands on the Duke's son. All this time, the guy diligently ignored any hints from the Emperor's daughter. He had no intention of breaking the official, trusting relationship between them that was dear to him. So, as soon as it came to love, Eric ran away from communication as quickly as possible. The younger Orleans planned to find himself a bride later, since he was currently developing in business. As soon as he left, Lily took up her post as a guard next to the princess, whom she always protected. So Ella had the opportunity to question the maid about the authenticity of the documents. The assistant personally saw Eric take these papers from the secret compartment in his father's office. But the girl did not get rid of her suspicions, because Waldeck could deceive even his own son. If this was true, the young man had no idea how much his father was hiding from him. Ella's smug face, which always embarrassed him, was still before the guy's eyes. Besides, Eric didn't like being in the secret club, so he always hurried to leave this place. Even in his wildest dreams, the Duke's son could not have imagined that he would meet Imerlin at the club. His face expressed many conflicting emotions, because surprise had taken hold of the guy too much, while the girl could hardly recover from the threats she had experienced from an unknown person. The aristocrat was now threatening to tell everyone that this lady had come to the club with a weapon. In an instant, Eric solved the problem with the help of a shoe he had recently picked up. The sight of the Duke's son's angry face would make any girl want to run away as far as possible. So this time, the heroine wasn't lying about being afraid of communicating with the younger Orleans. But, as in previous times, next to Imerlin, Eric suddenly replaced his anger with kindness. Until the very end, Wedgwood refused to believe that this guy could genuinely care about her. Somehow, Eric's emotions seemed true, although the young man remained just as grumpy. This time, the lady allowed him to help her, as she was completely lost in this place. But she didn't allow anyone to scold her, so this situation was no exception to the rule. Eric was much less well-versed in conversations that involved mutual accusations, so he had nothing to say in response to the fact that he had secretly met with the princess of the Dinique Empire. It was not difficult for the lady to guess that the Duke's son would only come to such a place for Ella's sake. In all respects, he was very similar to the guys who, according to rumors, the Emperor's daughter liked. Even Eric's character was too soft for someone who was the son of a real killer. In a fit of emotion, the heroine carelessly stumbled, and the guy caught her in his arms just in time. But as a child, the girl swore to herself that she would never allow intimacy with men. But this incident gave Imerlin the opportunity to notice that the young man had paper under his clothes. For some reason, the lady had no doubt that these were the very documents that her mother had hidden. Eric's behavior in the Duke's office did indeed seem suspicious. Since he had taken something, the heroine could not miss such a wonderful chance that would shed light on Waldeck's atrocities. While the guy hesitated, the girl snatched the papers, although she immediately guessed that they were different. But this did not take away her desire to check the documents for secret inscriptions that appeared in the heat. Although Eric had knightly skill, he did not manage to stop the strange and crazy lady. This is how the heroine demonstrated to the aristocrat that his father hid a lot of things from everyone. The boy was clearly not ready to learn the truth, that Waldeck was not a good person at all. Several years ago, Imerlin personally kept the books using invisible ink, so she knew well all the nuances of this writing, which was hidden from prying eyes. This is how the heroine easily revealed one of the Duke's first secrets. But there were many more along the way. But the lady was able to find out that Waldeck was in collusion with the prince and helped him in many ways. The only thing that Miss didn't specifically mention was the peculiarity of invisible ink. The whole point was that they couldn't be inhaled for a long time. But Eric didn't know about this property, so it was not surprising that very soon he became ill after being exposed to magic. Imerlin was only happy with the state of the Duke's son, since she wanted to interrogate him. Before he finally lost consciousness, the young man thought about the madness of this girl. Even with all his skills, Eric was unable to resist the effects on his body for too long. Perhaps that is why, during his sleep, He remembered the past, along with his mother's conversation. One day, the boy cruelly hit his enemy because he had offended him. He did everything just as his father told him, so he did not regret his terrible act at all. But Eric didn't expect to see that his actions would upset his beloved and beautiful mother to tears. Seeing her emotions at that moment, the boy decided that she had already started to go crazy. But the dream ended there, as Emerlin impatiently woke up the Duke's son. As soon as Eric came to his senses, he immediately felt the magical bonds that held him tightly. It took the guy a few seconds to assess the situation and realize that he had been kidnapped. Of course, the heroine would not have had enough strength to drag the young man outside the nightclub, but even so, he was extremely unhappy that the girl had somehow restricted his movements. Soon, Emerlin became even more interested in the fact that Waldeck personally sponsored Robert, who was the Emperor's son. This news did not please Eric, who had been helping the princess take her place on the throne all this time. These documents could well have caused a breakdown in relations between brother and sister. So the heroine was curious why Ella did nothing after what she saw. The answer was simple, and Orlean also quickly guessed that the princess did not know how to read double-entry bookkeeping. Emerlin froze in anticipation of being able to tell the young lady Danique everything. The more the girl spoke, the more Eric felt a nervous tremor spread throughout his body. Wedgwood now looked as if it was impossible to reason with her, although she had always loved money. But this time, she chose intimacy with the guy who was still desperately trying to bribe her. The Duke's son's thoughts were blurred by the fact that he had too little personal space. In fact, the heroine didn't start this whole game for no reason, because she had installed a camera in the room beforehand. As soon as Eric heard the click of the magic camera, he froze in place in surprise. The younger Orleans still couldn't understand why the girl needed such strange tricks, while the heroine planned to blackmail the guy with a photograph so that he would help in her case. Emerlin just needed Eric to ruin her father's impression of her entire family. But the young man was not one of those who agreed to cooperate under unpleasant conditions. In fact, this time Miss didn't even need the huge amount of money that the two Orleans had. She only dreamed that Eric would help her ruin her parents' wedding, which would lead to a terrible tragedy. The girl didn't care what methods the guy would resort to during conversations with Waldeck. The main thing for her was to eventually escape again to another empire, together with her brother and mother. She always knew that the elder and younger Orleans were aware of how much her mother loved money. Even as children, they went hungry so often that the woman took on the blame for raising the children. From Helena, the heroine learned that family was always above all else and needed to be protected. Although Eric did not believe her, the lady knew that Waldeck could easily kill all her loved ones. That's why Emerlin was so strongly opposed to her parents' wedding, because she just wanted to run away. The girl understood that she would not be able to win Eric over to her side in this matter with words alone, and documents came to her aid, on which only one part of a full seal was visible. The younger Orleans had to accept the fact that his father was still hiding something important from other people. After seeing the terrible future, the lady dreamed only of escaping from the empire, even if in disgrace. So she set Eric strict conditions, and he had to break off the engagement by tomorrow. But at that moment, the guy was only concerned about the fact that the girl, for some reason, walked straight up to the window. Emerlin had done something similar several times before, so she decided to keep a low profile at the club. But the young man was so worried about the lady that in an instant he broke the strong magical bonds. The heroine barely managed to jump down, as she did not expect that Eric was simply playing with her. The rush made the landing difficult, but the lady wasn't about to give up without a fight. Orleans had no desire to harm Wedgwood, so he stopped pursuing her. It was the first time the lady encountered such a strange person who took her safety into account. She quickly ran downstairs, although the thought that the guy was worried about her after the blackmail was stuck in her head. Although with great difficulty, the lady managed to reach the temporary estate without any problems in the early morning. But the girl didn't expect that her brother would be watching her right in her private room. She hoped until the very end that her disappearance from the house at night would go unnoticed by others. But apparently, the amount of alcohol the lady poured into him wasn't enough for Phil to sleep through the night. But the heroine did not want to explain anything to her brother, since it was unlikely that even he would believe her story. Because of his sister's strange behavior lately, the elder only became more angry with her, while the girl diligently pretended that nothing unusual had happened at all. But the mask of calm fell from her face when Philly asked if the girl had had a strange dream. The heroine didn't expect that someone else could see the future, thanks to that strange old woman and her drinks. But it turned out that the guy didn't see anything like that. He was just worried about his sister, who might not have slept well. In his mind, the new title should have pleased the lady, but Emerlin was afraid to receive it. Philly didn't care about the union with Orleans, since he never considered his father's part of the family. Only the heroine was worried about the constant, unpleasant rumors circulating about Wedgwood, and only the girl thought about how to live life without regrets and grievances, so that she could truly become happy. After the nightmare, the heroine dreamed that her family would no longer be subjected to humiliation, but Philly was so used to this kind of life that he didn't even try to look for other options for himself. the conversation between the brother and sister was interrupted by the sudden voice of their mother, who had been looking for the children since early morning. The woman was already completely prepared, since she did not miss a single social event. But Immerlin, due to the huge amount of work, completely forgot that today they were going to a banquet. So the girl was not mentally prepared for another public appearance, where she would have to endure rumors. Miss remembered well the event, at which the aristocrats continued to shun Wedgwood. But the Duke of Orleans still recorded his marriage proposal to the beautiful Helena, in full view of everyone. The woman suspected her future husband's plans, which is why she was so demanding of the children. She took Phil with her, and noticed in his face signs of drinking alcohol during the night. And Lily was ordered to help Immerlin, who openly demonstrated her reluctance to go to the banquet. Get ready. The maid always carried out all orders to the maximum, so she immediately reached for the girl's clothes. Too late, the heroine remembered that she had accidentally forgotten Eric's documents in her dress. Because of this, the lady carelessly showed her emotions, although she should not have aroused the suspicions of the servants. She didn't know that Lily was actually well aware of all the affairs of the younger Orleans. At that moment, the guy did not miss the fact that his assistant had clearly heard all the words of the young Immerlin. The situation became dangerous, because the maid had once sworn allegiance to the princess, so she could not lie. Eric understood how many problems could befall his family if the girl told Ella everything. In fact, Lily was a knight who always served the Empire loyally, even though she worked for the Duke's son. For Eric's sake, the assistant decided to give him time, since Immerlin's words could turn out to be false. This state of affairs was only to the advantage of the younger Orleans, because he was not as simple as he seemed. It was the guy who asked Lily to keep an eye on Immerlin in everything, but at the same time, not to interfere with her doing her own thing, all because Eric planned to be the first to get to the back of the documents that the lady was looking for. So Lily noticed any changes in the behavior of young Wedgwood, who had become more active lately. Meanwhile, the maid tried to convey to the girl that Eric's actions never diverged from his words. This was necessary in order to gain the trust of the suspicious Immerlin, who was hiding something. The assistant's words prompted the heroine to remember that Eric had long ago sworn allegiance to Ella. As a princess, this girl dreamed of taking the throne after the current emperor retired. It so happened that Waldeck in this dispute sided with the ruler's son, who also wanted to take the place on the throne. Immerlin would like to know in advance what position Eric will take when the truth about his father comes to light. But while there was still the opportunity to spend time peacefully, the Duke's son enjoyed his time at his native estate. To everyone else, he pretended that he was simply relaxing at the estate, while his father was away on business. But in reality, Eric came to Waldeck's office as soon as he had the opportunity. Ever since the boy learned about the secret documentation, curiosity had been eating him up from the inside. He wanted to know more about the secrets that the Duke tried to hide from the eyes of other people. And for this, the young man took a candle with him. But all the documents had disappeared somewhere from the shelves. The boy couldn't have imagined that his father would so quickly guess who was taking the materials with him. But what surprised Eric even more was that an inscription suddenly appeared on the wall because of the candle flame. These were the words of Emily, who insisted that she would never commit suicide because she loved her little son. But as a child, Eric believed that it was his mother who constantly called him a monster, which is why he closed himself off from her. Before the boy had time to come to his senses, he saw his smug father coming out of the secret room. The man was proud that he was able to catch the young man stealing documents that were important to him. Unlike Eric, Waldeck was in no hurry to grab his sword, as he wanted to resolve the situation peacefully. He had long ago guessed that his son had passed on a lot of information to the curious and cunning princess. Eric never denied this fact. They just had never had the chance to talk about it honestly before. Surprisingly, Waldeck reacted calmly to his son's revelation of his secret record-keeping. The Duke was one of those people who were always prepared for any unexpected event, so he enlisted the support of the emperor. The father's confident tone proved to his son that he really could not be accused of betraying the empire. But the inscription on the wall, written by his mother's trembling hands, did not give the young man any peace. This gave Eric even more reasons to support the wise Princess Ella. Although the Duke had warned his son about this lady many times, the boy saw nothing wrong with her. But for some reason, Waldeck believed that his son could succumb to his mother's madness if he truly fell in love with someone. At that moment, all the Duke's words seemed false to Eric for the first time, and they made him furious. After seeing the inscription, the young man did not believe a single intelligent word that Waldeck told him. But the Duke did not yet know that his son had long since gotten out of hand, and therefore had no intention of helping their family. So the man continued to demand that the guy carefully choose a bride for himself. After all, in the worst-case scenario, Waldeck could easily kill the unworthy girl. Meanwhile, at the banquet, the heroine looked around carefully in search of the Duke of Orleans. She set herself the goal of breaking off her mother's engagement, but she could not find Waldeck anywhere. Phil didn't have any big plans for the evening, so he allowed himself to relax. The guy kept looking at Princess Ella, who knew how to look stunning in any dress. It was the brother who told his sister the rumors that Eric was often seen with the heir to the throne. But before, it seemed to the lady that the Duke's son did not show any obvious interest in any girl, but she was little concerned with such details, since they did not in any way affect her future plans. But Emerlin's face distorted when Vivian appeared at the event in a beautiful dress. According to the dream, this girl was supposed to appear later, so the heroine was confused when she saw her. As usual, Cavendish would not ignore Wedgwood's daughter, who constantly offended her, and at that moment, Waldeck had to protect the girl, which would only please Helena more. But everything suddenly changed, and the heroine had no idea how the plot of her future would now unfold. The answer came instantly, as Vivian poured red wine on her rival's dress. The girl was not prepared for this turn of events, although she did not care about the quality of her outfit. Emerlin was much more confused by the fact that events did not follow their planned scenario. In her dream, Vivian began to bully not only her opponent, but also Helena as her parent. Only now did the heroine realize that the future had changed because she had behaved differently. This meant that Miss had a chance to influence the death of the family, and ultimately avoid it. Everything else didn't bother Emerlin, so she wasn't even upset about the ruined dress. The heroine quickly gained the upper hand in this situation again, as she frightened the young aristocrat. Only rumors about the girl's real father helped Vivian make the lady feel emotions. Until now, that man had been Emerlin's weak spot, as she feared him most of all. But the girl didn't expect that someone would spread rumors that she was the one who killed him. Cavendish noticed that she had finally hurt her rival, and this pleased her. From somewhere, the aristocrat learned that a woman's item had been found at the site of the Duke's death. Memories flooded Emerlin, and she saw her formidable father before her again. That day, he stopped her and Helena from running away from home. But the girl didn't remember if she had the hairpin. But this detail could have crossed out the entire past and future that the heroine remembered for herself. The sudden appearance of a handsome man only made things worse, as the girl recognized him. It was the same aristocrat who tried to subjugate the lady in the secret nightclub. His name was Gary Hale, and he was still one of the top heartthrobs in high society. Before Emerlin could come to her senses, the man approached her again, but salvation came in time. Gary didn't even notice how someone kicked him so hard that he flew several meters away. It turned out that Eric arrived at the banquet at exactly that moment, and immediately noticed something was wrong. No one expected the Duke's son to stand up for a girl who had not yet become his sister. Hale tried to defend himself until the very end, because people came to the club only for secret pleasure. But Eric already had an alibi prepared for Emerlin, although he had to lie a little. However, the princess graciously supported the words of the guy who told her about her meeting with Wedgwood, so Gary had no grounds for objection and was forced to admit his guilt. But the heroine didn't feel any better after being saved, as the memories overwhelmed her. In the past, the mother often repeated to her daughter that her father Violet did not die because of Emerlin's actions, but the rumors that Vivian brought with her still caused the girl terrible pain. Before Eric could come to his senses, the heroine ran away, as she was unable to remain in society. Every time she remembered the past, she could not cope with her own emotions. Fear and pain pierced Emerlin from within, although she was not worried about the death of her cruel father. But this time, the lady did not have to suffer alone, as Eric followed her anxiously. True, the heroine wasn't sure that she was ready to talk to a guy whom she didn't yet trust, but the Duke's son's plan worked. So after his question, the miss forgot all about her feelings. Eric specifically asked if Emerlin knew what was among Waldeck's secret records. Of course, the heroine knew the whole truth well, but she could not tell about her dream. The girl had to defend herself so as not to accidentally let the information slip to Eric. Surprisingly, this time, the guy put aside the calm that had guided him all this time. In fact, the young man had long since grown tired of obediently following all the orders of his suspicious father. And after seeing his mother's notes, the whole world turned upside down for Eric, who believed Waldeck. So for the first time in his life, he resorted to blackmail, although he had previously despised such methods. But now the guy confidently lied that he could tell everyone that the lady had killed her father. After all, the girl had a good motive in the form of an inheritance that she could receive from Wedgwood. Anger overwhelmed the heroine's entire consciousness, even though her threats were not so cruel. Now she was convinced that Eric was like his father and could not be trusted. But in reality, the guy was suffering greatly and only acted this way as a last resort. He feared that Waldeck would be far more powerful than any of them could imagine. And in the end, the entire Wedgwood family will die, as once happened in his distant childhood with his mother. The heroine did not expect that Eric would learn the truth about what happened to Emily so soon. It became clear to her why the guy had suddenly stopped trying to continue being a good person. But even in this guise, the Duke's son continued to care for Emerline, which she did not expect. The lady herself had thought about collaborating with the younger Orleans, but his proposal was hasty. At this point, there were only 2 influential families in the empire, excluding the imperial family. The northern Duke Gerda communicated with practically no one, patiently guarding the northern borders. But every beggar has heard of Orleans, since he actively developed his territories. That's why rumors that he had fallen in love with a girl from a simple family quickly spread throughout the empire. And only Helena knew the truth that, in fact, the Duke of Orleans had not fallen in love with her at all. Their first meeting was so beautiful, as if it happened in a real fairy tale. Waldeck beamed with a pleasant smile and immediately confessed to the woman his love at first sight. But Helena Wedgwood was not one of those who believed in such fairy tales for naive ladies. Orleans seemed to her like a narcissistic aristocrat, and she loved to use people like that for herself. So the woman skillfully blossomed next to this man, although she felt nothing for him. But his power and wealth were the tools that attracted the former commoner. However, that evening, their date did not last long, as it was interrupted by a young assistant. Although Waldeck didn't tell Helena anything, his face was terribly distorted by the information. The curious woman was ready to help her future husband, but his facial expression stopped her. For some reason, this whole situation did not give Madame any peace, although before she had been confident in her abilities. But now, for the first time, Helena seriously considered calling off this strange engagement. Meanwhile, a frank conversation was taking place between Eric and Emerlin, literally a few meters away. The heroine still did not understand why the Duke's son suddenly took her side in this matter. No matter how the guy interrogated her, the girl refused to reveal the whole truth about her knowledge. The talkative Eric himself suggested that the lady might have had an informant, and she seized on the idea. Otherwise, how else could one explain that the young aristocrat knew so much about the future? Orlin himself tried to find people who would obtain information, but so far without success. But he was able to find the reason why the Wedgwood family was so interesting to his father. The whole thing was that after Violet's death, they inherited a small piece of land. And according to legend, it was in this place that a huge grave of mermaids with their posthumous energy was located. There were many rumors circulating throughout the empire about how exactly this legendary place was formed. And the most popular information was that George Dennick once went on a sea voyage. His voyage ended unsuccessfully, and only many days later was the former emperor found. It turned out that in the place where he was stuck, a huge number of crystals with magical energy were found. Since then, people have concluded that the first emperor of the Dennick clan was blessed by the mermaids themselves. For many years, generations of this family continued to search for that mysterious place with magic. But the documents for the territory were so confusing that no one could predict where the crystals with magic were located. Even Emerlin had no idea where to look for that place, because she had not dreamed of it. What could one say about Eric's knowledge, who had been collecting information bit by bit all this time? The heroine refused to believe that Waldeck killed her entire family just because of some land. But what surprised her most was that Eric was going to personally punish his father, who had committed the crime. This frightened the girl, who herself did not have a clear conscience, but for some reason, the guy took her side. It turned out that the young man was tired of trying to deal with villains with kindness, as he had done before. That's why Eric decided to become a villain in this story too, and for this, he needed young Emerlin. The heroine could not understand what was going on in the head of the Duke's son, who learned of his father's betrayal. Suddenly, beautiful lanterns lit up around them, and the lady was ready to swear that this was not just a coincidence. Emerlin was prepared for a lot in her life, but she never managed to cancel her mother's wedding. However, Eric's marriage proposal still knocked the girl out of her calm. It was clear from the younger Orlin's face that he was not joking when he said such important words. Silence fell over the atmosphere around the boy and girl when the lady heard such a crazy idea. She did not remain silent, although she herself asked Eric to come up with a way to break up their parents' wedding. The heroine clearly did not expect such a turn of events, since she had never seen anything like it in her dreams. But she understood that there was no other way to interfere with the elder Orlin's plans for now. Otherwise, Waldeck will indeed carry out his terrible desire to murder the Wedgwood family. This is how the heroine suddenly found herself a husband, although their marriage was temporary and fictitious. But the girl still went to the princess to get her permission for this matter. In fact, such words were not necessary, but Orleans did not have time to warn the girl about this. So Ella took advantage of the situation to test Emerlin's loyalty to her side. The heroine felt guilty about taking the Duke's son away from a girl who might have had plans for him. It was no secret that the heiress had a hard time letting go of the guys she liked. So right now, she needed some good arguments in favor of this from Wedgwood. For this occasion, Eric asked Emerlin to bring the very documents that he had recently stolen from his father. The princess clearly didn't expect the red-haired girl to bring her so much useful information. Ella had long been looking for evidence that her brother was connected to the elder Duke of Orleans. The fact that the guy personally brought documents that disgraced his family spoke volumes. Now, Eric was ready to take responsibility for the actions of his father, who had done many terrible things. Ella liked the honesty of the guy, who remained on her side until the very end. For now, the princess did not plan to tell her father about what she had found out about the Duke of Orleans. This is all because the heiress always chose the side of observation. because it was easier for her to choose her paths. But she did not expect that with Waldeck's wedding, the territory of the mermaids from the legends would pass into his possession. Of course, as a girl from the Denick clan, the lady had heard a lot about this huge cluster of crystals, but what she didn't know before was that it was the Wedgwood family that currently owned the area. So now Ella had several reasons to support the marriage of Imerlin and Eric. The princess knew that with her permission, everyone would forget about the wedding of the elder members of the family. Besides, with the heir to the throne's finances, there was always the option of simply paying the right people. Therefore, Ella no longer doubted that she should approve the fictitious marriage of her two acquaintances. It was no trouble for the girl to quickly sign all the documents needed for the wedding, but it still remained a mystery to the guy why Ella so easily approved of his marriage to another woman. During all the time he spent communicating with the princess, Eric managed to get pretty tired of the fact that she liked him. It was obvious that the heiress did not really believe in the existence of the mermaid's grave. Moreover, for Eric, Ella's abilities exceeded all the skills of her older brother Robert. But all this did not explain the fact that the emperor's daughter so easily let go of her target in the form of the duke's son. Meanwhile, the heroine discovered that the princess's servants had found her slipper in a secret club. The girl was pleased to realize that she had already attracted the attention of a higher-ranking official. In fact, the lady was filled with confused feelings about the duke's son, as much had changed, and in the end, all their actions led to Imerlin getting married, even if it was only for a while. Throughout her life, the girl valued her family, no matter how many people it consisted of, so she was already ready to protect Eric in everything, because she had always lived by these rules. The duke's son did not expect that the princess's outfits would suit Imerlin's face so well. At that moment, the younger Orleans could not find the strength to tear his eyes away from the beautiful girl in front of him. While watching the couple, Ella never told anyone that it was not the land of the mermaids that attracted her to this business. In fact, the princess was interested in watching the love story unfold before her eyes. Of course, a little later, the girl was visited by difficult thoughts about the elder Orleans. She didn't believe in the existence of the land of mermaids, but now she couldn't ignore the duke's actions. But the last thing Ella wanted in the world was to lose to her older brother, who had no talent. But, despite all her power, the lady still almost missed the mermaid's grave due to her distrust of the legends. So before meeting Waldeck, the princess threw all suspicions out of her head. Now she had to keep up a face as if she had been the ruler of the empire for a long time. In the meantime, Ella had achieved a small victory by winning Margaret Beaufort over to her side. It was precisely with this aristocrat that the Duke of Orleans had been trying to start a business all this time. The man had long needed electricity, which was found in large quantities in crystals. So Ella wasn't surprised by the fact that the Duke was so desperately searching for the forgotten grave of the mermaids, while Waldeck continued to pretend that he was on the side of the young princess. This advantage allowed the girl to grin brazenly in the face of the opponent who lost to her. For the first time in her life, she knew a little more about her than the Duke of Orleans could imagine. Waldeck's self-confidence did not play into his hands this time, because he did not notice how his son stopped obeying him. The princess really needed Margaret Beaufort's support, as the lady was very influential. That is why Ella came to Madame the very next morning to support their financial relationship. Meanwhile, Imerlin was secretly preparing for her wedding, which was supposed to happen in a couple of days. It turned out that that secret photograph wasn't enough to convince everyone around. In the matter of rumors and gossip, Lily, who knew a lot, could help the guy and the girl best. This time, the assistant finally showed Wedgwood her true face. She was a knight. She needed Imerlin and Eric to portray two lovers who were secretly strolling at night. This is how the heroine had to take part in a night photo shoot, although she wanted to rest. Lily tried her best to ensure that the future newlyweds had a good connection. Imerlin quickly got a taste for it as she managed to notice how her mother seduced men. But Eric turned out to be too resistant to such surprises and defended his personal space. The guy was worried that, after having an affair with him, the lady would never be able to marry another man. Only now did the heroine realize that marriage and all its consequences were very important for the Duke's son. It would have been most advantageous for him to marry a princess, whose status would have greatly raised his own. The lady knew how the Duke's son valued his reputation, but she could do nothing to help him in this matter. Now, the girl had to pretend to be a lady in love in order to prevent her mother from getting married. Surprisingly, the girl found this game easy, although in reality, she felt nothing for Eric. But the sweet smile did not leave Imerlin's face at the moment when she pressed herself against the guy. Of course, Lily managed to capture such beautiful emotions that everyone will believe in. A little later, Eric couldn't stop admiring the photos, which turned out so lifelike. But the assistant was only concerned about whether her master was really going to marry Imerlin. Eric himself had heard many rumors that this girl allegedly killed her father as a child. But he saw her weakness, so he understood that with these accusations, everything was far from simple. The Duke's son thought that Helena was to blame for everything, but this still had to be proven. But Lily still doubted that Imerlin could be trusted with personal matters, while the younger Orleans had already made the decision that he no longer supported his father. In this situation, the maid could only silently watch as events unfolded. Eric specifically sent Imerlin a large check, supposedly to prepare for the wedding. But in reality, he wanted to check who exactly the girl who loved her family would ultimately choose. Meanwhile, Waldeck did not give up on trying to build a new business that would bring in profit. And for this, he turned to Emperor Melmus, who supported his ally in many ways. The ruler had a good opinion of the Duke of Orleans, as he constantly lived up to his expectations. In this way, he reminded him of his daughter Ella, who aspired to take the throne in the near future. But throughout the history of the empire, it had never been ruled by a queen, and Melmus made no exceptions. He was only sad that his son Robert was not nearly as enterprising in business. That is why Dennick entrusted the education of his son to the Duke, who had already devised a test for him. This mission was beneficial for Waldeck, as it was supposed to bring a lot of money and status. Melmoz did not feel sorry for Robert for a moment, as he handed him over to be raised by a real beast. After all, if Waldeck fails to make an emperor out of the young man, then no one else will be able to do so. The next morning, the heroine was confronted with the money that Eric promptly sent her. The girl couldn't even imagine that the guy valued his promises and words so much. A maid had once warned her about something similar, but the lady had ignored it. And now she saw first-hand evidence that the Duke's son could indeed be trusted. The lady was so busy with her own affairs that she forgot that the whole family was visiting the temple today. It was hard for Emerlin to reconcile the break in her mother's engagement with the appearance of order, but she had no right to refuse the visit of the priests who were supposed to conduct the wedding. The temple assistant actively pretended that he was glad to see such good people around him. But the heroine was still confused by the fact that Waldeck never showed up for this important event. For some reason, Helena continued to defend her future husband, although she herself doubted him. Until now, she had allowed her daughter to be indignant, which the girl had taken advantage of and expressed her opinion. The lady remembered that Eric would soon have to appease the priest for their wedding, but she didn't expect that Elder Orleans had already donated a huge sum to the temple for the event. Emerlin immediately realized that she had no chance now, since it was unlikely that Eric would have more money. This time, Helena did not tolerate her daughter's discontent. Since she loved money more than anything in the world, the woman had noticed more than once that Emerlin had changed a lot lately. But until now, the girl had not confessed to her mother what had been troubling her and eating her up from the inside. Although the lady was already an adult, she still needed support from her beloved mother, and Helena always found time to comfort her child, whom she was trying to give a better life. But the heroine was no longer sure that incredible wealth could make her happy. Mother constantly talked about the importance of family ties, and none of the Wedgwoods violated these rules. However, Imerlin understood that she would not be able to save her loved ones if she continued to follow their wishes. What Miss feared most was that the accusations of her father's murder would actually turn out to be true. After all, then Miss will no longer be able to help the family in any way, since she herself will need saving. Such heavy thoughts did not give the heroine any peace, and she still could not find a solution. Suddenly, the girl noticed a photograph of one of the priests, which immediately attracted her attention. Emerlin was ready to swear that she had seen this face somewhere before, even though she had not visited the temple. Memories obediently surfaced in my memory, because in my dream, Feely had told me about this man's misdeeds. The unexpected decision impressed the girl, who understood how to insist on her own wedding. Now nothing could make Emerlin turn away from the path she had set before herself. The lady remembered that it was with this priest that Eric would have to negotiate today, and without her help with this matter, the guy would hardly be able to bribe the priest, who had done a lot of things. Priest Andrea was truly unapproachable, no matter how hard the Duke's son begged him. The man didn't even want to think about blessing the young couple faster than their parents. Eric had already tried all the words about how much he loved Emerlin, but it was not enough. The priest knew how much money Waldeck had donated to the temple, and that was enough for him. At the very peak of their argument, the doors to the temple suddenly swung open, interrupting the sad conversation. It turned out that Lily had to disobey the order, according to which she was waiting for the master outside. All because the maid lost sight of Emerlin immediately after she was paid the money. Time passed, and there was no news from the daughter of the Wedgwood family, which alarmed many. Eventually, even the Duke's son began to doubt the honesty of the girl who loved money. He really did give her a huge sum, which became a good test for the lady. But for some reason, the guy didn't want to think that the beautiful Emerlin had actually just run away. Although Lily was already eager to act, the young man kept her close to him until the very end. Eric had one last chance to convince the priest to fulfill his request. Andrea was visibly embarrassed when such a high-status aristocrat knelt before him. Normally, no noble person did this, so it created problems for the priest. In such a situation, it was difficult for the man to find the words to refuse, although he could not do otherwise. Eric was truly desperate, as he had failed to stop his father before. That is why, at that moment, the guy used all methods to achieve what he wanted. And he would have been refused, if not for the appearance of a boy who called Andrea his father. The priest clearly did not expect to see his son in such a place, since they were forbidden to see each other. But what surprised Eric most was that immediately after the child's appearance, a familiar voice was heard. It turned out that Imerlin had not run away at all, but had used the money to search for the boy. And now the priest was in an awkward situation, so he needed to explain himself properly. Priests were not allowed to indulge in human joys, but one day Andrea allowed himself to do so. It was precisely for this offense that the heroine, who had many reasons for blackmail, got caught. The priest's child behaved extremely provocatively, so much so that he aroused people's suspicions, and the father knew perfectly well about his son's behavior, although he tried desperately to hide his existence. Confusion crossed Andrea's face as he realized he had fallen into a trap because of his beloved son. The lady saw that the priest had almost given up, and now he needed just a little more pressure. So she turned to Eric for help, whose male strength would be better suited to the task. But the guy ruined everything because he suddenly switched from talking to action. This was not part of Imerlin's plans. She merely wanted to threaten the offending priest. It was the first time she had seen the Duke's son so obediently fulfill all her requests without words. The guy himself quickly admitted that he felt guilty towards the girl because of his behavior. All this time, the lady was carefully looking for reasons to blackmail Andrea, and the young man suspected her of running away. This was not the result Imerlin had in mind when she tried to break off her parents' engagement. Suddenly, the priest came to his senses again, as Eric's blow had not been enough for him. But the Duke's son quickly rectified the situation, and Andrea lost consciousness again. The younger Orleans was pleased with himself, as he had spent a long time honing his physical skills. Only thanks to teamwork were the boy and girl finally close to their goal. Now that the priest was with them, Andrea had no choice but to cooperate. And only Lily continued to silently watch from the side the efforts of Eric and Imerlin. It was to the maid that the girl turned with her request, as she needed to deliver a letter to her mother. The heroine had thought this moment through in advance, as she was planning to run away from home for a while. The assistant did not expect that such a young girl would possess cunning and wisdom in her decisions. It was she who ended up having to watch, as Helena read the letter from her daughter in a rage. The woman had long suspected that Imerlin was up to something, and now the first signs had appeared. In that letter, the girl said that she had fallen in love with an amazing guy and got pregnant by him. The mother was furious that her daughter dared to do something like this without her knowledge. For the first time in her life, Lily saw such a terrifying aura emanate from an ordinary woman. But Helena was good at hiding her emotions from other people in order to get what she wanted. And this time, she persuaded the maid not to tell anyone about Imerlin's absence for now. The assistant always obediently carried out orders, unless they contradicted each other, while Helena smiled at the maid until the very end, while she was next to her. But as soon as Lily left the room, the woman's face immediately reflected a predatory gaze. Meanwhile, the heroine was worried about how her day would go tomorrow. She did a lot to change her terrible dream future. The girl even secured the support of the princess, who was selective about her circle of friends. But the fear that all of Imerlin's plans would still fall apart gradually ate away at her from the inside. The only thing that saved the girl from going mad in solitude was that the Duke's son was always nearby. The guy just wanted to discuss a few things, which saved the lady from heavy thoughts during the night. In fact, Eric felt a little awkward entering the room he had provided to Imerlin, but there was information that couldn't wait, which is why the guy came to the girl. In the meantime, he noticed their photograph, which the lady had carefully placed on the table. Before, Eric had no idea that he could smile so sincerely and beautifully on camera. He wanted to report that the girl's mother had been looking for her everywhere, although she had not filed a search report. The heroine expected such an act from Helena because she always cared about her family. Imerlin herself didn't know for sure whether she regretted having to lie to her own family, but what the lady had no intention of doing was running away from the fate she had chosen for herself. Eric supported Wedgwood in her decision to stop Waldeck and promised her a happy life with him. And so the next morning, the young couple was the first to come to the temple to sign the marriage contract. The heroine's heart beat treacherously with excitement, although she thought that she could cope with her emotions. The throbbing veins on the Duke's son's neck betrayed his anxiety, but outwardly, the boy remained calm. They had done so much to get to this point that there was no question of taking any step back. Andrea was still against such a marriage, but it was as if someone had asked his opinion. In fact, Orlin still had doubts about betraying his own father, but he couldn't do otherwise after everything he learned about the deeds of the man who killed his wife. As soon as the priest began to read the oath, as expected, a noise was heard outside the doors of the temple. Such an event could not be hidden from the eyes of other people, so witnesses quickly filled the room. Among them were Waldeck and Helena, whose wedding was to take place that same day. But their children were not going to give in to their parents on this issue, because their lives depended on it. Never before had the heroine been so glad that she had been able to deceive her own mother. She signed the prenuptial agreement first, even though Andrea had not yet finished his speech. Meanwhile, Helena was desperately trying to get through to her daughter, who was doing something wrong. Waldeck realized too late that his son had been too suspicious lately, and this led to Emerline having time to enter into a fictitious marriage with the younger Orleans. Now, according to ancient customs, they only had to seal the agreement with a beautiful kiss. Eric was the first to reach out to the girl, although he felt extremely insecure in front of other people. Even the heroine felt the falseness of such a timid kiss, which was not suitable for marriage. But the guy sincerely did not understand what the girl was demanding of him in such a tense situation. Although the guards tried to keep an eye on the people, they still brazenly broke into the temple. Many reporters were already busy capturing this moment, which will soon make all the headlines. And for their sake, the heroine kissed Eric so passionately that her own heart skipped a beat. So it was no surprise that the Duke's son blushed embarrassedly in response to the girl's actions. But at that moment, nothing could disturb the joy of Emerline, who had already married Eric. The girl had no idea that her actions had earned her a terrible enemy in the form of Waldeck. There was a time in the past when Helena took her children to exhibitions because they loved it. Feely, as usual, ran after noble ladies, which only worsened over time. But what was more of a surprise to Madame Wedgwood was that her daughter had finally become interested in something. Emerline usually didn't pay attention to the guys, but he was staring at the portrait of Thumbelina. It turned out that for the first time in her life, the heroine liked a short man. The thing was that the girl was already afraid of tall guys, and therefore did not pay attention to them. That is why the woman could not even imagine that her daughter would allegedly fall in love with the tall Eric. She ran into this guy periodically around the estate, and every time he tried to behave politely. But Helena couldn't shake the feeling that she should have been more secretive with the Duke's son. But the young man really did look like the main character of Thumbelina, except that he was much taller. So when Madame received a letter from her daughter, she didn't even think about Eric. It was clear to the woman that she should not look for Emerline if she wanted to hold her wedding. Meanwhile, rumors of Lady Wedgwood and Eric meeting at a secret club were already gradually spreading, and the talkative filly couldn't keep silent about this for long, although he promised his sister that he wouldn't tell anything. Even then, Helena suspected that Emerline was trying to do something behind her back for the first time. But the woman could not have imagined that her daughter's misdeeds would turn out to be so unpleasant. It was now too late to try to stop the boy and girl from getting closer to each other. The initial excitement about the wedding died down, and reporters finally turned their attention to the priest. It came as a surprise to Andrea that every person in the empire knew about his antics. For some reason, the priest hoped that Eric would hide all his crimes for the sake of his own wedding. But the Duke's son remained just as cruel in his justice and desire to punish the guilty. This time, Waldeck interrupted all the arguments, eager to sort out the situation. The heroine expected that the Duke of Orleans would not be pleased with her actions and someone else's wedding. But Eric unexpectedly stood up for the girl, as he felt he had to bear responsibility. It turned out that Waldeck still had a chance to break off the children's engagement, which was not in his favor. This is because they had to spend their first wedding night together for the contract to come into effect. So the elder duke hoped to catch and separate the newlyweds so that they would be left powerless. In this situation, Helena could not help her daughter in any way, because she did not know how to calm the formidable Waldeck. But Eric was prepared for his father to demand a battle to sort this situation out. The elder duke really did look like a man who was not going to back down from anything, so the heroine had to hide behind the altar so that she wouldn't get hurt during the fight. But it turned out that the girl was not the only one who hid in this well-protected place. Priest Andrea accumulated so much anger towards the lady that he put aside all prohibitions regarding his status. The man was deeply offended, so he allowed himself to attack the poor girl. It occurred to Emerline too late that she might well die differently. Nothing like this was described in the dream, but Miss had already managed to change many things. True, the priest's heavy hand never reached the lady, as her brother came to her aid. As a result, Andrea rolled back several meters and was not able to get up again anytime soon. The girl was noticeably surprised when she saw Phil, since he rarely rushed into marriage first. But now the guy was going to do everything to protect his beloved sister from pain. It was his cry that ultimately stopped all the fighting, as the young man always knew how to surprise. And at that moment, he loudly declared that Emerline was pregnant in order to stop all the fighting. The heroine didn't expect that, even in such a difficult situation, Philly would come up with something to say. After such a statement, Waldeck did not dare raise his hand in the room with the pregnant girl. So Emerline had no choice but to continue playing in this situation. It was clear from the elder duke's face that he was not ready to give in so quickly for the sake of marriage. It was obvious that Emerline and Eric were recognized as newlyweds, since all the conditions were met. But Waldeck would not rest until the imperial palace confirmed this information. So now everyone had to go to the emperor to hear his decision. The girl did not understand the seriousness of this situation, since she did not know about the friendship between Melmoth and Waldeck. But Eric knew all too well that his father had not just suggested the option with approval. In the imperial palace, it will be difficult to bribe a doctor to confirm a lady's pregnancy. Before leaving, the elder duke warned Imerlin that she might greatly regret her lie. The man had no intention of forgiving his relative for ruining his wedding. Then the heroine again felt Waldeck's true personality, which he stubbornly hid. Even tense, Eric didn't look as dangerous as his own father did. Meanwhile, a family breakfast was taking place at the imperial palace, but Ella was not there. The girl found out about the general meeting too late, which is why it took her so long to get ready for breakfast. While the father and son had been talking about various topics for a long time, without waiting for the princess, the girl immediately noticed that the atmosphere at the table was different from what she usually felt. For some reason, Robert did not pay due respect to his sister, although he always tried to be polite to her. Terrible suspicions overwhelmed the princess, and she began to wait for some unpleasant announcement. From her brother's smile, the lady saw that he and her father had managed to agree on something without her. And Ella turned out to be right, because Melma sent Robert on an expedition to the northern territories, so they needed the blessing of the princess, who was considered a symbol of success in the empire. But the girl was not ready for such a turn of events, as she was too afraid of the Duke of the North. Although Sir Gerda lived at a distance, he caused a lot of inconvenience to the emperor and his family. There was a situation in the past when Melmas entrusted his daughter with a very important task for the first time. It was that same expedition to the north in order to collect taxes and donations from the Duke. At that moment, the princess was proud that her father had finally recognized her services to the empire. But then the girl did not yet suspect that the emperor hoped that the lady would not be able to return back. Only Duke Gerda told her the cruel truth about this, which made Mrs. Hart sink into her heels. This man showed no sympathy whatsoever for the girl who barely made it to his property. So it was difficult for the princess to imagine that such a man would suddenly begin to cooperate with Robert. The girl, who found this state of affairs offensive, was overcome with rage. But the emperor did not allow the children to quarrel, since he had not called them to breakfast for this reason. The eldest son, as usual, quickly changed his expression, just to please his father and everything. But the princess was not ready to accept the fact that Melmas loved Robert much more. Only now did she realize that from the very beginning, father and son had fought together against her. So the girl had no desire to continue smiling at the people who had betrayed her. Melmas was surprised by Ella's behavior, as she usually tried to obey him. But the lady's patience had long been running out, but she held back her rebellion until the very end. All these experiences made Ella feel ill, as she could not withstand the moral pressure. Since childhood, the princess could not understand why her father treated her with such disdain. Since there was no one else in the corridor, the lady allowed herself to lean against the column. But suddenly, it turned out that it was a man whom the girl had never seen in the palace before. Miss immediately recognized him as an assistant from Duke Gerda's side, which angered her. The girl had not heard of her father letting people from the north into the palace, so she was able to act. The guy realized his mistake too late, so he tried to escape. But Ella always had a short conversation with those who did not follow her orders and requests. The girl had no intention of forgiving an assistant who did not belong to her palace. The poor guy didn't even have time to utter a word before he found himself caught in the princess's arms. The only thing that stopped the lady from being interrogated right now was the sudden arrival of her friend Eric. So the assistant had to gather his strength before they started to beat the answers out of him. Until then, the guy had to spend some time in the imperial dungeon. The princess hated Duke Gerda more than anything in the world, and therefore she did not like his assistance either. In the end, it turned out that the emperor was unable to terminate the marriage contract between Imerlin and Eric. The ruler was even glad about the union of two young people who could achieve a lot in the future. He believed the doctor who confirmed the heroine's pregnancy, although it was false. So in this situation, Waldeck could do nothing, because the decision had already been made. In fact, Melmas did not care which of the Orleans family would unite with the Wedgwood family, but it was a mystery to Imerlin, who from the imperial palace helped her in such a difficult matter. As soon as the girl saw the princess's smile, she immediately understood what had happened. Just a few minutes ago, Ella ran into the imperial physician in the corridor. She had some very compromising information on this man, so the man could not refuse the request. Until now, Eric had been anxiously awaiting any words from his father, who for some reason remained silent. So the guy involuntarily shuddered when Waldeck finally began to express his opinion. Surprisingly, the Duke of Orleans took the news that his marriage could not take place calmly. The man clearly had something new in mind if he so easily agreed to accept Imerlin as his daughter-in-law. Like everyone else, he had no right to oppose the emperor's decisions, which were always the law. But with her whole body, the girl felt the tension that emanated from the enraged duke. But the mother distracted the lady with her sudden approach, which even frightened the miss. Although in reality, Helena did not plan to punish her daughter in any way, because she loved her. Of course, everything the girl had done in recent days came as a surprise to Madame, but she still supported Imerlin and even gave her a note with advice for her daughter. after which the woman suddenly pretended to be ill since she did not want to stay in the palace any longer. Feely always helped his mother in such situations, so he left the room with her. The elder brother still believed that Emerlyn had acted terribly for deceiving them in such an important matter. But Helena understood that it was not them that her daughter was trying to resist in this difficult situation. She remembered well how she felt at the Duke's estate when she was alone. Madame had heard a lot about the mysterious forest that was located on the territory of the Orleans family, and she could not imagine that Waldeck's wife would walk alone through such a terrible place. The feeling that the Duke was not telling her everything constantly haunted the wise aristocrat, but despite this, she never refused to meet or talk to her future husband. And a few days ago, everything happened according to the usual scenario, as Waldeck called the lady through the servants. But for some reason, every time Helena had the feeling that she was going to her death. However, the woman easily managed to pretend that everything in the Duke's estate delighted her. She was even surprised by Waldeck's beautiful office, which took care of his own comfort. That day, the assistants again interrupted the gentleman too early from his meeting with his future wife. Because of his work, the Duke could not refuse the servants in solving problems, so he left Madame alone. And this time, the woman did not waste time, because curiosity was eating her up. She was quickly able to find one book that was very different from all the others on the shelf. This is because Helena's previous husbands also had secret rooms in their offices, so it was no surprise to the woman that she was able to find such a move again. Madame even knew about secret inscriptions that could only be seen with a candle. But no matter what Helena found in that place, she didn't tell even her son, but she persuaded him to help his sister. Even though Emerlyn got involved in a complicated matter, the woman did not know exactly what goals her daughter was pursuing by using such strange methods, but she believed that the girl would not betray her family, no matter how it looked. Literally, the next morning, Robert nevertheless set off north on the Emperor's orders. The princess watched this whole situation from the window with displeasure, but was unable to influence it in any way. But she was pleased that she had managed to bribe the doctor in time to help her allies. Lately, only information from the newspapers has distracted the lady from her heavy thoughts. And this time, reporters wrote about the secret wedding of two beautiful young lovers. They didn't forget to mention the princess, who became the godmother in this quick marriage. The girl was only glad that all the excitement about this matter quickly died down in the empire. Only now did Ella realize that she could have lost the battle for the throne if she had not approved of the marriage. And now the girl had a chance to fight, because Waldeck did not receive a place with mana crystals, but thoughts about the captured servant did not give the lady any peace, and he could not speak. The princess was irritated by the difficulties in translating the words of the young man, who seemed harmless to hers, but all that was left was to wait until her assistants could establish communication with that guy. Of course, the faithful servant had to remind the girl that her father wanted to see her. But Ella didn't want to meet the emperor now, so she pretended to be very ill. All their conversations were too much alike for Miss to afford to waste time. But the princess suddenly became interested in another point that she had previously overlooked. The thing was that Ella had never seen such a loving look from Eric. This circumstance interested the girl, who always knew how to make plans quickly. So now the newlywed couple was needed by the emperor's daughter for her plans. As soon as she invited the newlyweds, Eric and Imperline quickly arrived at the palace. Ella immediately announced to them that she wanted to personally obtain the territory with the mana stones. This request came as a surprise to the boy and girl, even though Ella had helped them a lot. But even Emerlyn had no idea where exactly that place from her dreams was. But the princess was not bothered by the enormous expenses of the search, because she could afford them. The only thing Ella didn't expect was that Wedgwood and Orleans didn't plan to live together for long. Personally, she believed that Emerlyn was ideal for the role of the young wife of the Duke's son. But the guy didn't like it when Ella started dictating her terms to him for personal gain. The princess surprised even the heroine with her proposals, because she actually demanded that she become pregnant. This was not part of the plans of the girl, who simply wanted to save her family from the killer Waldeck. But the princess didn't like to stop halfway, so she needed land with crystals. The decision came unexpectedly, because Emerlyn could have transferred this territory to Ella for use. The only thing that complicated things was that too many people had previously owned this land. That's why everything always came down to the heroine having to get pregnant by the Duke. The guy himself didn't say anything about it, but his face revealed his inner tension. Only Emerlyn fought against conceiving a child, since their marriage was only temporary and fictitious. Too late, the heroine noticed that, for some reason, she began to feel noticeably dizzy. Eric immediately noticed that his ally's condition suddenly began to rapidly deteriorate. Suddenly, he himself felt signs that he would soon faint. This is because the princess initially did not expect easy consent from her friends. She was used to thinking everything through in advance in order to put all her plans into action. And now Ella needed a real spark to emerge between Eric and Emerlyn. The Duke's son was physically well developed, so he was able to move even under the influence of the drug. But for this case, the princess had prepared guards in advance, which the weakened Eric would not be able to cope with. Only now did the heroine realize that she should not have trusted the Emperor's daughter so blindly. Even the Duke's son did not expect that his ally would act so cunningly towards him and his young bride. But Ella's plan ultimately worked out perfectly, as her friends were unable to suspect anything. And now the Emperor's daughter had to answer all the questions of the impatient Wedgwood family. Although the princess immediately said that a meeting with Imerlin and Eric was impossible, Feely did not leave. He came to talk to his sister, but ended up facing such difficulties. The girl seemed to him too straightforward and stubborn, which corresponded to her status, but this behavior was very different from the behavior of princesses in fairy tales and legends. That's why it was so difficult for the guy to resist Ella, whom he couldn't argue with. So this time too, Philly had to leave empty-handed, because he never saw his beloved sister. Until now, the boy could not understand why his mother continued to do nothing in this situation. But it turned out that Helena was not at all worried about her daughter, who was hidden somewhere. At the moment, the woman was glad that Imerlin was under the princess's care. But Philly could not understand his mother at all, because he wanted to help his sister if she was in trouble. But it was he who got into trouble, because their location was revealed. And now, a longtime adversary named Mary Colleone could once again find her debtors. Meanwhile, the heroine finally came to her senses after a long sleep due to sleeping drugs. The girl did not immediately understand where she was, since her consciousness returned too slowly. She could not have imagined that the usually smiling Ella possessed such cunning and treachery. And now Imerlin had to somehow miraculously deal with the consequences of this matter. Because of her thoughts, the girl did not immediately notice that the Duke's son had been lying next to her all this time. She was consoled by the fact that the guy was breathing evenly, although he still hadn't opened his eyes after sleeping. While Eric was inactive, the heroine could not stay put, because she wanted to return to her family. But there weren't even any handles on the doors of the room so that the lady could open one of them. It was necessary to give credit to Ella, who was so eager to take her place on the throne. So Imerline didn't know what would help her in the situation she accidentally found herself in. Suddenly, the girl heard a whisper from the Duke, who was muttering something in his sleep. From the fragments of words, the lady understood that the guy was now dreaming of his mother, whom he considered crazy. The girl couldn't even imagine how hard life had been for young Eric all this time. Having received the status of his wife, Miss had the right to carefully support the guy in such moments. This is because even her dream did not reveal the full depth of the pain that the Duke's son was experiencing. While he slept, Imerlin had time to read that very note from her mother. It turned out that Helena had managed to find Emily's diary somewhere, which everyone considered crazy. In it, the woman wrote that she had seen her husband's murders, but he carefully concealed them. So in the end, Emily had no idea where the truth was, and where the fiction was in her terrible story. The entire diary was full of horror, and the heroine had no doubt that her mother had read it to the end. It turned out that Helena also knew what really happened to the Duke's ex-wife. So in her letter, the woman begged her daughter not to trust Eric, no matter how good he seemed. Madame remembered that her daughter wished never to marry, so as not to suffer because of men. That's why she prepared another escape for her family, just to hide from everyone. But for some reason, memories of carrying Eric just wouldn't leave the young heroine's head. Lately, the guy had helped her so many times that she no longer doubted his identity. Now, the girl was torn between conflicting feelings because she did not want to leave her family. And at the most inopportune moment, the lady suddenly heard the voice of Eric, who had finally woken up. While the Duke's son slept, he dreamed of his troubled past, which contained a lot of pain. As a child, he often heard his mother crying behind closed doors and longed to go to her. But all the maids stopped the young master as they were carrying out his father's orders. The boy was told that Emily had gone mad and that he could not be infected with his mother's madness. Therefore, when they went on walks together, Eric always kept an eye on his mother's behavior. She even frightened him by coming close to the cliff, wanting to look at the vast expanse. The boy tried to hold the woman's hand tightly because he didn't want her to die. Only occasionally did his mother treat her son well, and it seemed to him that their life was getting better. But the rest of the time, Emily ate practically nothing and locked herself in her room. But in calm moments, the woman showed love for her son, even though they communicated very little. Eric treasured every moment he was able to spend well with his mother. But everything changed the moment the boy saw fear in the eyes of the previously calm woman. She screamed that she had given birth to a monster's child and could not calm down, despite help from others. Recently, Eric began to blame himself for not having tried to help his mother back then, and now he couldn't shake the thought that he could have saved his mother if he had intervened. After such dreams, the Duke's son's awakening was difficult, because all his thoughts were in disarray. But as soon as he saw the half-naked Imerlin, the guy instantly came to his senses. All the puzzles slowly fell into place in Eric's head, who had been fast asleep the whole time, while the girl was afraid that the Duke's son had managed to notice his mother's diary. But it turned out that the guy was worried that the lady might do something to him while he was sleeping, while the heroine didn't even have a thought in this direction, so she remained dissatisfied. The lady was relieved when she realized that the Duke's son had not noticed either the diary or the note. She easily got out of this situation under the pretext that she was simply adjusting her clothes. There was a time in the past when Emerlin kidnapped a guy, but even then she didn't do anything to him. So all the girl's indignation due to the groom's suspicions was completely justified. She continued to plan to support the guy in everything, so she didn't even try to harm him. When Eric woke up, Miss expressed to him all her indignation about the current situation. She tried so hard to fix the future, so that her family would not die at the hands of the cruel Duke of Waldeck. And in the end, the girl fell into the net of the princess, who was no less cunning than the elder Orleans. It wasn't hard for Eric to guess that they were still in the imperial palace. Unlike the girl, he did not try to make any attempts to find a way out. But the heroine believed that her family was already looking for her, so she tried to escape from prison. She was used to the fact that many such rooms always had secret doors and passages. But the lady didn't expect that she wouldn't be allowed to return to the estate after escaping. Only Eric understood the seriousness of the situation they found themselves in together after their marriage. Now Emerlin had a new name, and her life brought with it the corresponding obligations. The heroine herself didn't know how she would behave with her new status after the wedding. What surprised the girl most was that Eric was also in danger after everything that had happened. It seemed to Miss that the Duke would not touch his own son, since he needed heirs. But Waldeck always easily dealt with those who suddenly stopped obeying him. Eric knew from the very beginning how difficult it would be for him to resist his cunning and rich father. But, looking at the girl's face, the guy did not regret at all that he had linked his fate with her. The Duke's son was ready to defend the lady to the last, which he honestly admitted to his new wife. The lady was noticeably surprised by such promises, which she did not expect to hear from the guy. But it turned out that Eric did not do this at all, because he was afraid of threats from Philly. He didn't even remember how the boy had furiously demanded that the Duke's son not offend his sister. All of Eric's desires for protection were sincere. As he considered Emerlin his family, the heroine did not understand why there was such a huge difference in behavior between her son and father. Waldeck was ready to kill any person who stood in the way of his cherished goals. But Eric spoke only about protecting the girl, although this caused him conflict with his father. So the lady had no choice but to ask the guy to take care of her family. It came as a surprise to her that Eric did not consider the Wedgwood family to be real relatives, although not everything was smooth in his family either. At least the guy had no illusions about it. He knew very well how many times Helena had married, just to get a little richer. It was this woman that Eric blamed for the murder of Violet, who had been missing for a long time. But the heroine was not going to listen to anything bad about the people who had been close to her since childhood. Seeing the genuine anger on the girl's face, Eric wisely put this conversation aside. But all this led to the lady suddenly becoming interested in the wall she had recently hit. The boy didn't immediately notice that Emerlin was busy examining the wall, which was no different from the others. It turned out that the lady had finally found the secret passage, which made her noticeably happy. But this place was not an exit, since Ella had prepared it for lovemaking. The heroine did not expect that the princess would think through every detail in this room, down to the smallest detail. Eric was the first to blush, as he realized exactly what they had accidentally found. But the lady did not give up trying to choose at least something that would help them get out of the room. Seeing such despair, the Duke's son could not leave the girl alone, so he took up a whip. He had only planned to break down her doors. But for Emerlin, this action became a completely different signal. At that moment, Eric's face reminded her of her father's expression, who often punished the young lady. Horror and pain filled the heroine's entire consciousness, and she lost the ability to think normally. And the poor guy had no idea that he had accidentally become the cause of nightmares about Lady Wedgwood. The Duke's son realized too late that Miss had been overtaken by terrible memories again. She cowered, trying to move as far away as possible from the young man who had a whip in his hands. This is all because, in the distant past, the lady lived for many days in a row with a terrible and cruel father. If the girl did even the slightest thing wrong, her punishment was immediately a flogging. Violet showed no pity for his daughter, as he always had sadistic tendencies. Although Eric did not know all of Emerlin's past, he saw how much she was suffering now. At such moments, he tried not to touch Wedgwood's daughter, so that she could come to her senses on her own. But the Duke's son's actions were not long in coming, as the guards heard a crash coming from the door. Eric easily broke the entrance with the whip, as he put all his magic into it. The guy was in such a hurry because Emerlin was not herself, and he wanted to help her. That is why the young man did not even pay attention to the state of his body, which was damaged by magic. At that moment, he wanted to help the girl who couldn't come to her senses as quickly as possible. As soon as the princess learned about Eric's prank, she immediately considered him a crazy person. Ella was well aware of how much power it took to infuse magic into the whip. Only swords were suitable for such purposes, and even then, not all knights were able to cope with the energy. So the Duke's son's body must have been subjected to a very strong load, after which he suffered. That is why the princess did not make any claims to the assistant for the broken door. She felt that she had miscalculated her friend's strength, since she had been unable to keep him locked up. What surprised the girl most was that even in this state, Eric was worried about Emerlin. Ella understood perfectly well that he himself needed a doctor, because the boy was not in the best condition. The whole point was that the Emperor's daughter had placed a very powerful barrier on those doors. But no matter how bad Eric felt, he really ignored his health for the sake of the lady. The boy was very worried about what had happened to Miss Wedgwood in the past. When he first saw the panic in her eyes, he didn't believe the sincerity of such emotions. But the situation repeated itself, so now the young man had no reason to doubt Emerline. He saw firsthand how scared she was, even though Eric had done nothing wrong. And now the Duke's son was tormented by thoughts of what bad thing had happened to Emerlin in the past. He understood that he would hardly be able to help, but he wanted to at least ease the lady's condition a little. While Eric guarded the girl's peace, he watched every change in her face. Thanks to his presence, the heroine's serious expression gradually smoothed out. So the guy felt better, seeing that the lady was finally resting peacefully. After everything that happened, he swore to himself that he would definitely make this lady happy. A personal acquaintance with Emerlin suggested to the Duke's son that the girl deserved such a future. While there was such an opportunity, the young man continued to tenderly hold the heroine's hand. It was at this action that he was caught by the maid, who entered the room without knocking. Lily had been unhappy from the start with her master's growing closeness to Wedgwood. She saw that right now it was Eric who needed the warmth from the hands of the unconscious girl. But the maid was not one to talk about her thoughts, unless there was some reason for it. And now the Duke's son needed to get to his father's estate, so there was no time for words. As soon as they moved, Lily still had to listen to all of the young Duke's reasoning. The boy himself faced misunderstanding from his parents, whom he loved as a child. So he knew all too well Emerline's panic, remembering her father. That's why Eric was so desperate to help the girl, because he himself had long since dealt with his emotions. But her past was not a simple matter, because the lady managed to change several fathers at once. Even Lily, who could easily find any information, knew too little. All she knew was that Violet had also married several times to different girls, but each time he left them with nothing, since no one stood up for the common people. From the very beginning, the maid suggested to the master not to interfere in this family's complicated business. But now, it was the personal interest of the guy who took Lady Wedgwood as his wife, so Lily had to obediently tell everything she knew about Helena's past. This woman was initially different from all the other wives of Violet, as she was cunning, so she was able to fool Emerlin, for whom she was not a mother. But when a child is left completely alone, he or she is expected to reach out for love and support from an adult. This is how the heroine began to consider a woman who was not her own family as her close family. This attitude allowed Helena to continue to control the girl who received her father's inheritance. So it was no wonder that Emerlin loved her mother so much, who always treated her well. But all this only added more problems for Eric, who was trying to figure out this situation. That's why he so desperately needed any information about the relatives of the deceased Violet. Meanwhile, the heroine suddenly came to her senses and immediately remembered everything that had happened in detail. What made the lady most ashamed was that she was clinging hopefully to Eric's body. The guy didn't react to such hugs in any way, although he continued to hold the girl tightly in his arms. Because of the shame that had covered her head, Miss could no longer stay in this room. As usual, she resorted to the window escape method. But this time, something went wrong. The thing was that Helena had been hanging on the ledge for some time now, hoping to see her daughter. The mother was noticeably tired after such a workout, but was still happy that she had achieved her goal. The heroine could not even imagine that her mother would personally come for her, even to the imperial palace. For some reason, it seemed to her that the woman harbored a grudge against her daughter after that terrible deception with the wedding. But Helena was still only concerned about money, and that was what she came to her daughter for. Madame has already come up with an escape plan in which they steal the Orleans family's wealth. Only this time, Emerlin could not rush off with the same joy after her mother. Helena clearly didn't expect her daughter to suddenly change the routine they had been following. She gave her the diary so that the lady could blackmail Eric and get a lot of money. It turned out that the woman had only found Emily's diary near the outbuilding by pure chance. She was lucky that the servants had not gone there all this time because of the Duke's strict punishment. Only now did everything fall into place for Emerlin, because even in the dream, this was not told. She realized that her mother had not planned from the very beginning to stay with Waldeck for long. Her plans were, as always, flawless, as Helena intended to continue to remain on the run. Only now the heroine was sure that all her mother's actions would be useless against Eric. For the first time in their lives, they came across a man who always punished criminals and scoundrels. But Helena did not believe that someone good and honest could grow up among the aristocrats. So only Emerlin was of the opinion that it was time for them to stop running away. But the fears inside the woman were too great for her to listen to her daughter's opinion. Madame knew well how harsh Mary was with those who accidentally became her debtors. But over the course of all this time, The heroine got tired of constantly running away and hiding with her family. Even as a child, the girl dreamed that they would finally find a real home for themselves. But, apparently, Helena had a different idea of a happy future for them all. The woman believed that as long as the Wedgwood family remained together, they would not be afraid of trials. A sudden guess struck the heroine, because her mother's behavior was very different from her dream. The whole point was that Helena did not yet know about Waldeck's intentions to take her inheritance away from her. It was useless for Immerlin to tell his mother now that the Duke of Orleans would find them everywhere. The woman behaved this way only because she did not know some very important information about Waldeck. That's why she tried to take her daughter and son with her and go on the run again. Whatever the heroine says now, it will not change Helena's decision, who dreamed of escaping together. The girl always loved her mother, but now she needed to hurt her with her words. It took the lady a while to pluck up the courage to say the right words. She began by saying that Helena herself did not know what love was, and the woman's face immediately distorted. And Immerlin ended her speech with the words that she did not want to repeat her mother's difficult